You've been really vocal recently about ivermectin. So what I mean, you talked about hydroxychloroquine many months ago as well, and you got obviously censored for it and badmouthed and all this sort of stuff. And now you're talking about ivermectin as well. What was it that you heard about ivermectin that really got you excited about
firstly, months ago, and I'm talking about 6 months ago, I spoke with one of Australia's leading professors in this area, and he rang me. And I said, Professor, help me explain things to me. I said, I don't understand the medical. I look at the numbers, look at the details, I can read the studies, but I don't understand the medical. Help explain it to me. And he said, you're 100% right. Hydroxychloroquine works. So it's a fantastic treatment against COVID. This is our best medical brain. I said, well, why can't? I said, but you're not actually saying that in the media. You're talking about ivermectin. He said, yeah. And I said, well, why don't you talk about hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin? He said, well, he explained to me they basically do very similar things. He said, they work differently in different ways. And he says, but they are both what are called the zinc ionophores. So they combine with the zinc and help the zinc enter the cells. So quercetin is another zinc ionophore. So they're basically doing a similar thing. So he said, if I argue for hydroxychloroquine, I've got to go and fight a political argument. So I'm just going to get on and use ivermectin and help people and help people survive.
That was 6 months ago.
6 months ago.
Okay.
And this was just after, in April, it was an Australian researcher at the Adelaide University that actually discovered that in a test tube, ivermectin kills COVID stone cold dead. Now, obviously, when something works in a test tube, it doesn't mean it works in the human body. And that's why you need to do these other trials. And as the evidence has rolled in and different countries are trying different things, and when I say, it's funny enough, it's mainly the developing nations, a lot of what we call third world countries, that are actually doing more experimentations than the advanced countries. Like to date, there's not a trial of ivermectin, a proper trial of ivermectin in the entire USA, but for some unknown reason. But yet there's trials in Egypt, there's trials in Argentina, and there's trials in Bangladesh. These places that are doing it, and they're finding absolutely astonishing results. So you've got to look at the numbers, look at the data. Now, so ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine have both been treatments that have been spoken about, and surprisingly, our National COVID Evidence Task Force recommends against both, not to use them. They've got no. So what's interesting on the ivermectin that's come through in the last fortnight? There was a hearing in the U.S. Senate. It was the Home Affairs Senate Committee run by Senator Johnson, and he had a gentleman called Dr. Pierre Kory. If you haven't seen that video, go and watch it. It's had 5 million views already, and this is a doctor exasperated, saying, "I know this works. I'm saying I can save people's lives with it." But he's working in the ICU, and he said, so many people come to me and it's too late and I can't help them. It was a very emotional interview. It's absolutely extraordinary testimony. And he talked about the success of ivermectin. Now, since that testimony, there was a study out of Argentina, and it was across 4 hospitals in Argentina. And what they did, they said, okay, we've got 1,200 hospital workers, from the doctors to the orderlies to the nurses to the janitors to the registrars. So we've got 1,200 people across 4 hospitals. What we'll do, we'll give some ivermectin, and we won't give some ivermectin, see what the effectiveness is. So they gave around 800 people the treatment of ivermectin, and about 400 people said, no, just go about and do your normal work, but of course with all the protective equipment. Of the group they didn't give anything to, that were just going about their work, 58% of them came down with a positive test for COVID. Now, you'd imagine if you're in busy hospitals in a place like Argentina that don't have the resources that Australia does, and sick people are coming in all the time, and COVID's everywhere, and they've got high rates of infection. You can imagine a hospital, you'd be pretty likely to catch COVID, and 58% of them did. But of the 800 group that they gave the ivermectin to, and exposed to the same risks there was 0 infections, not one. Absolutely astonishing results. And that study is not any sort of outlier. There were similar results in a study in Egypt, which had about 80 to 90% efficacy. There's just been a study released out of a hospital in Bangladesh where they're looking at the frontline hospital workers, because they're the ones most likely in society to catch COVID, because they're exposed to the virus in the hospital. So the idea the results are absolutely extraordinary. And many countries around the world, they have this in their national protocol. In fact, someone sent me something from India. And in India, it's a packet that was ivermectin, I think doxycycline and zinc in a packet that you could buy. And it was like the equivalent of $2.60 Australian.
Wow.
So that was the course, right? But of course, that's recommended against here in Australia. But they recommend, and it's not as though, this is why I find it objectionable about what some of these health bureaucrats have done. It's not as though there's an alternate treatment for early treatment. It's not as though there's an alternate treatment they recommend and say, look, take this. This actually works. We think this is better than this. Okay, that would be fair enough. But at the moment, if you get sick with COVID, the current sort of official medical advice from our health bureaucrats is go home, have some Aspro. If you have trouble breathing and start to go blue in the face, call an ambulance. And yet all these other medical professionals around the world are saying, no, if you catch COVID, you take this as an early treatment. Professor Peter McCullough, Professor Marek gave a great interview the other day on this. And these are not sort of like hillbilly doctors or sort of like, these are guys with more letters after their name than in the alphabet. These are guys with lifetime experience of medicine, the most highly qualified and respected people that you could, medical professionals, and that's what they are recommending. So it's not Craig Kelly's opinion or Craig Kelly's view. It's some of the highest qualified medical practitioners and experienced professors in the world that are actually treating patients at the coalface. So they're not sitting back in some ivory tower looking through some report or something. They're actually treating patients at the coalface. And they say ivermectin should be rolled out as a prophylaxis very widely. Well, and yet that's ignored by health bureaucrats. And that's why I get cranky and why I get upset and why sometimes, I sound as though I'm a bit angry with things.
Well, look, there's only, as a citizen, there's really only 2 things I can think of as to why they would be trying to not use hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin, or even just giving us ideas on how to keep our immune system strong, is either they don't want COVID to go away, or someone's going to lose too much money if there's an alternative to the vaccine or something else. Can you explain to someone who doesn't know? I know a little bit, but about the patent versus who can make money off of things.
Okay, we have what's called intellectual property. So for artists, if you do an artwork, you own the copyright in that artwork, right? And you get monopoly rights, so someone can't go and steal your artwork. We have trademarks, as where, say, Coca-Cola and McDonald's is a trademark, so you can't go and open up a hamburger restaurant with the name McDonald's, because McDonald's own that intellectual property as a trademark. When it comes to medicines, we have patents, and it works a similar way. So if a company or an individual comes up with a new drug by mixing all the different chemicals and substances together to come up with a new drug, and that drug is effective and gets approved, they get a patent for it, which means they have a monopoly right. So only that company is allowed then to sell that drug, and they can effectively name their price. Now, that sometimes sounds a bit harsh and unfair, but you need that because you want to be encouraging companies to invest money in medical research. A lot of the new drugs that they research, they can put tens of millions of dollars of research into it, and come nowhere, the drug doesn't work, so they lose all that money. So when they do come up with a successful drug, there's got to be some financial reward for them. There's got to be some benefit for them to put all this investment in to discover these new drugs. So there's nothing wrong with that. But the problem that we have, and I think this is something we need to look at real closely down the track. Where there's drugs that come off patent, that means instead of one company having a monopoly at producing them, anyone can make them. So then often when you go to a chemist, they say, would you like the generic one instead? It's exactly the same chemical formula, but it's not made by the original manufacturer, and it's often less cheaper. So the prices come down. So generic drugs are generally very, very, very cheap. So what you're talking about, that's what you're talking about treatment of ivermectin, you're talking in dollars. Right? As when you're talking about a treatment like remdesivir, which is a patented drug which they give to you in hospital, is something like $1,000 plus because the patent hasn't expired. So drugs like hydroxychloroquine, remdesivir, hydroxychloroquine I think is about 50 years off patent. I think ivermectin something like 30 years off patent, around ballpark figures. So that means you've got hundreds of people, hundreds of companies around the world making them, and the price comes down, and anyone can sell them. So there's no great incentive for research for the repurposing of these drugs and combining several off-patent drugs. There's no incentive for anyone to do the research.
Yeah.
So this is what people say, there's no randomized clinical trials on these things. Well, yes, because no one is doing them because there's no great financial incentive. If you show that ivermectin is successful, okay, there's no great financial prize for you at the end, other than maybe. So that's why you see all the work being put into new drugs rather than to these older off-patent drugs.
So I'll just summarize for people out there. So if ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine was approved as a preventative / cure for COVID, companies like Pfizer, Moderna, and the other one would basically lose a lot of money because less people would be entitled to take the vaccine, and companies like that wouldn't be able to have a patent on it, and they wouldn't be able to charge ridiculous amounts of money for their drugs.
Well, if ivermectin was done as an alternate to the vaccine, you're talking these companies would lose tens of billions of dollars.
Yeah, and all of their associates and their partners who have partnered with them. I mean, they've already sold, millions pre-sales of this vaccine. So it seems to me like there's only a small amount of corporations that will lose out if things like
there are definitely people in the world that have a vested financial commercial interest in spreading false information about hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin.
Yeah. Or squashing the real information.
Yeah, and we saw that with hydroxychloroquine with that fake study that was published in The Lancet. Remember, this was data that was fabricated. The people behind that study fabricated the data to try and to paint hydroxychloroquine in an adverse light. And somehow or other, it made it through peer review. And it wasn't until they got caught a couple of weeks later and were challenged about, well, show us your raw data because this doesn't look right to us, that they couldn't come up with the raw data, and it was retracted. And even the people from The Lancet themselves said, this is fraud. So there are people, that should be fully investigated as to what was that person's motivation for engaging in that fraud to try and discredit hydroxychloroquine.
And even though it was retracted, the damage was probably already done because it got out to all the mainstream media, and so people just, that's it. Hydroxychloroquine's bad. That's it. It doesn't even matter.
And remember, the greatest advantage these people also had was the fact that President Trump said it's effective. So you had all the media that hated President Trump to such a degree, they wanted to show not only was he wrong, they showed that it didn't work, but they wanted to show it wasn't effective. So they ignored all the evidence that showed it was and came up and continued to publish these dodgy studies and continued to publish dodgy information and vilified in the media. Like I've been attacked from pillar to post in every media outlet in the country because I said, hey, just look at the evidence.
Yeah.
Don't take mine. Read the evidence. Look at what these medical experts are saying. This is contrary to what else is being said. And they wanted to show, a lot of these media people, they wanted to show, look, what's it, ABC Media Watch did a piece on it, absolutely disgraceful report. And that was all because the bloke that runs Media Watch is infected by Trump derangement syndrome. He started his show out saying, oh, Trump recommended it, therefore it must be bad, must be dangerous. But this was just disgraceful.